Yes. Can Corler Post take questions 1 to 3 together? In recent months, I've continued with an intensive programme of engagements with EU leaders. On the 8th of July, I welcomed the Chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz, to Dublin. This visit took place as Austria began its 6-month presidency of the Council of the European Union and followed my own visit to Vienna in February. I was pleased that Chancellor Kurz chose Ireland as the first member state to visit under the Austrian presidency. Topics discussed during our meeting included Brexit, migration, trade, the digital agenda, the post-2020 EU budget, and these issues all feature on the EU's agenda during the current Austrian presidency. I also met with Chancellor Kurz at an informal meeting of EU leaders which took place on the 19th and 20th of September in Salzburg. In July, I travelled to Croatia, Romania and Italy, meeting with the Croatian President, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, Croatian Prime Minister Andrej Plenković, and Speaker of the Croatian Parliament, Gordon Jandrović, and in Zagreb on the 23rd of July, and also with the Romanian President, Klaus Iohannis, the Romanian Prime Minister, Victoria Danicela, and the President of the Chamber of Deputies, Liviu Dragnea, in Bucharest on the 24th of July, and also with the Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, on the 26th of July in Rome. Topics discussed at meetings with my European Council colleagues included Brexit, migration, the post-2020 EU budget, bilateral relations which are excellent with all 3 countries, were also discussed during the meetings. My visit to Romania was particularly timely as the country will take over the EU presidency in the first half of 2019, the period during which the United Kingdom will leave the European Union. On the 6th of August, I met with the Prime Minister of Greece, Alexis Tsipras, in Athens, and I took the opportunity to express my condolences following the tragic loss of life due to the fires in the Attica region 2 weeks previously. Prime Minister Tsipras, in turn, expressed his sorrow at the death of an Irish citizen, and I subsequently wrote to the rescue staff in Greece who helped to rescue one of our Irish citizens there as well. Our exchanges also covered Brexit, migration and economic issues, where in particular I congratulated the Prime Minister on Greece's exit from its economic adjustment programme. I also briefly met with several of my European Council colleagues on the margins of my recent visit to the United Nations last Monday, including Prime Minister Oireachtas of Estonia, Joseph Muscat of Malta, and also the President of Cyprus. Ongoing engagement and further upcoming bilateral meetings are envisaged for the period ahead, and these will be confirmed when details have been finalised. I'll continue to take advantage of every opportunity to advance Ireland's interests with fellow members of the European Council.
Just 2 questions. The Taoiseach obviously met with a lot of EU leaders over the course of the summer, and I've no doubt that they expressed support for Ireland in relation to the Brexit issue and the backstop on the border. Could I just ask a question in relation to that? The October summit is going to be important, but the general view is that a major decision won't be made until November, although I hear now that there's talk of another European Council summit in December, well, a scheduled one, but that decisions may, in relation to Brexit, may be left over till December. I think that would be a very retrograde step. The European Parliament has to ratify the withdrawal treaty, as indeed the other EU states. So could you comment on the timetable in that regard? I notice also migration was a big issue when you discussed various matters with these EU leaders. It is a big issue. It's a big challenge facing the European Union. I note what the EU has agreed in that regard at European Council meetings in relation to disembarkation platforms, control centres and reform of the common European asylum system, especially the Dublin regulation. And I note also that Ireland has opted in to relocation and resettlement measures. I think Ireland can learn from the mistakes of other EU countries. I think we need to manage diversity and implement successful integration policies. There's no room for for complacency in that regard in respect of this country. And Taoiseach, can you assure me that we are pursuing successful integration policies in our country here in Ireland, and that we are managing diversity, because it's a huge issue in Europe. There's European Parliament elections coming up next year. I think migration is going to be a big issue in those elections, and I want you, Taoiseach, as Head of Government, to assure us that we're doing everything possible in this country to ensure the successful management of migration.
Yes, Taoiseach, I know you didn't refer to your meeting with the British Prime Minister in Salzburg, which I presume happened, because I think it's becoming, yes, and the British Prime Minister is still an EU leader, hasn't left yet. It's becoming increasingly clear, Taoiseach, that the absence of a working Northern Ireland Assembly, and indeed executives, causing major problems in relation to the Brexit negotiations. Instead of having a cross-community democratic body speaking out for the people of Northern Ireland, and indeed the majority anti-Brexit majority, we have party agendas dominating. The appalling comments today concerning the Good Friday Agreement confirm the damage. In this case, Taoiseach, it would have been expected that the restoration of the Assembly and the Executive would have been an absolute priority for you. Yet the evidence is that for the first time the whole area seems to have been effectively subcontracted to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and that you do not see relations between the government buildings in Dublin and Downing Street as central to the process. This is the only conclusion which we can draw from the irregular contact which you and Prime Minister May maintain. Earlier this year you went 7 weeks without speaking. Before Salzburg you went 10 weeks without speaking. You do not appear to have had a bilateral session focused primarily on Northern Ireland since the shambolic visit to Stormont in February, where you and the Prime Minister flew in to take the glory for a deal which never materialised. While Michel Barnier is indeed our chief negotiator on Brexit, Taoiseach, you are supposed to be our chief negotiator on Northern Ireland. Can you tell us what initiatives you intend taking to engage the British Government on this? Is it your position that irregular and short conversations display a decent working relationship or a real priority for Northern Ireland?
So I think it should be at this juncture clear, even to Deputy Micheál Martin, that at the heart of the crisis and the hiatus in the institutions in the North is the fact that the DUP have not embraced the Good Friday Agreement. And you can only have a functioning system of power sharing where you have parties that are open to power sharing. You can't indefinitely suspend the expectations of an entire society and tell people to wait and wait and wait some more whilst one party, the DUP, refused to play ball. So those are the facts. So nobody regrets more than I the fact that the agreement in February was not taken over the line, but the responsibility for that rests at the feet of the DUP. Responsibility for the toxic relationship between the Tories and the DUP lies and rests respectively with Theresa May and with Arlene Foster. And I agree with the Deputy when he says that the North needs to be a priority for the Taoiseach, that the commitment needs to be strong, that the channels of communication need to be open. I think that's fair enough. But I frankly don't think it's fair, and it's not dealing with the very, very challenging realities, to play a game of make-believe and to say, well, everybody is wrong in this scenario. The difficulty and the fault squarely lies with one party, and that party is the DUP. And we need to try and fix that. We need to resolve that. But we can only do that if we are prepared to say that out loud and to challenge Arlene Foster in particular in that regard. Taoiseach, can you tell us what you said to Chancellor Kurtz on the issue of migration? Did you challenge him? Did you challenge his partners in government? And as to our management of migration here, I think it's been fairly disastrous. I think one only needs to look to the system of direct provision to have proof positive that far from managing migration, in fact, we are failing spectacularly in that regard.
Thank you. Ceann Comhairle, can I begin by actually congratulating the Taoiseach in organising a series of bilateral meetings through the summer and beyond. I think it's an important ongoing process, and I think it's the right thing to do. I spent weekend before last rather, at the British Labour Party conference, and I met with a variety of different groupings, small firms representatives and very large business representatives. Without any exception, all of them outlined the negative impacts that Brexit will have on the economy and on employment in the United Kingdom. And none of them knew how to actually even articulate this without fear of being overwhelmed with criticism. That's the background music in the United Kingdom right now. A lot of the focus politically, and I think it will be the same perhaps at the Tory conference underway right now, is on what will happen next year in, if you like, the final chapter leading up to the UK exit. What will happen in Parliament? Will there be a majority for this or for that? I tried, and I continue to try, to focus on the Irish backstop now. Because if there is no agreed legal formulation for an Irish backstop, we won't get to a vote in the British Parliament in terms of a withdrawal agreement, because there won't be one. So can I ask the Taoiseach directly, what is your understanding of the date when the British government will publish finally its legal understanding of what they politically agreed to in December of last year? We know that they've dismissed the Barnier interpretation of that, and Barnier is going to have another go at it. But we also understand from repeated commitments that the British government are going to set out its legal understanding. When will that happen? And finally, in the event of that not happening in advance of the October EU summit, that the British not setting out their legal understanding of the backstop, what will your response be?
Taoiseach, two quick questions. Have you had any discussions with your European counterparts about the passing of the nation-state law in Israel by Benjamin Netanyahu? On top of the long list of apartheid and racist measures directed against the Arab and Palestinian population, the nation-state law is an explicitly racist and apartheid law which flies in the face of international law and the right of Arab and Palestinian people to national self-determination. And I just wonder, is Europe intending to do anything at all to make any statement about how repugnant and in breach of international law and rights that this nation-state law is? And just on migrants, was there anything said about the shooting taking place against by Moroccan forces of migrants, to add to the atrocities being committed against desperate people fleeing the Mediterranean? That latest incident was pretty shocking.
Can we take 3 minutes for a response?
Yeah, of course, Ceann Comhairle. Just in terms of the forthcoming EU summits, there's a regular summit in October, and a regular summit in December. There's the possibility of a special summit in November if it's necessary, and that has yet to be confirmed, but we agreed that there would be one if it's needed, either to confirm an agreement or to study the fact that we don't yet have an agreement. Obviously, I'd much prefer if we could conclude the withdrawal agreement, including the Irish Protocol and the political declaration on the new relationship. They're the three elements that go together and have to be agreed. I'd much prefer if we could do that at the October summit, rather than having to have a special summit in November, and certainly would not want to wait until December. But that's not something that's entirely under our control. The timeline obviously works back from the end of March, when the UK will leave the European Union, and sufficient time has to be there for the UK Parliament to ratify any agreement, and for the European Parliament to ratify any agreement. I imagine if they had to, both parliaments could do that quite quickly, but I think it would be far from ideal to have a situation whereby this was left run on into November, December, and even into the new year. I think that would be most regrettable, and I sincerely hope that we're all able to avoid that. And I think we'd start to see a significant impact on confidence in our economies if it was allowed to run on that long. So I'll be doing everything I can to make sure we have an agreement sooner rather than later. In terms of integration and diversity, I disagree with Deputy McDonald's assessment. I appreciate that there are plenty of issues and shortcomings, and direct provision may well be one of those, but 1 in 6 people in Ireland were not born in Ireland. Relative to other countries, that's actually a very high level. It's higher than in Britain, higher than in France, higher than in Germany or the Netherlands, and I actually think we've done much better on integration than those countries, largely because of the fact that our immigration has been diverse. It hasn't all just come from mainly one country, it's come from other parts of Europe and all over the world, and because migrants are so well integrated into our labour market, in fact more likely to be working than the average Irish person, and more likely to be paying tax than the average Irish person. Really holding up our public services in many areas, particularly in health, and also helping to bring in investment by big companies into Ireland, whether it's Facebook or Google or you name it. And I was at a very good project the other day, led by David Stanton, but also very much involving the private sector as to how we can encourage migrants who are not part of the labour market to become involved in it, overcoming the barriers that they face. And I think there actually is a lot of good work done in those areas. It's never going to be perfect. You know, no country can say it's achieved perfection in terms of migration and integration, but I think relative to other countries, we've actually done pretty well. Like, when you consider 1 in 6 people in Ireland not born here, and us becoming a net inward migration quite suddenly, having had decades of outward migration, to suddenly have become a country with very significant inward migration. And I'm pleased and proud of the Irish people that during our deep recession, when there was very high unemployment and when living standards were falling, that people didn't turn to anti-immigration politics or to racist politics in the way they have, sadly, in other countries when times have been tough. Shall I continue, or?